Stephen Maxwell knew two things with absolute certainty: the exact chemical composition needed to remove any stain known to man, and the precise sound of his daughter's laughter, which was the only thing that truly mattered. His world was one of squeaking carts and the lonely echo of footsteps in empty hallways after midnight. Hers was a world of silent commands, stock tickers, and the hushed whir of a multi-million-dollar motorized wheelchair. He was the janitor for the top 3 floors of Calder Tower. She was Rowena Calder, the paralyzed billionaire who owned it all. They were separated by a universe of wealth and circumstance, until the night he looked her in the eyes and made a promise so audacious, so impossible, it should have gotten him fired on the spot. The penthouse of Calder Tower was less a home and more a museum exhibit on the beauty of isolation. Spanning 3 floors, its floor-to-ceiling windows offered a god's-eye view of the city, a sprawling galaxy of lights that served only to highlight how far Rowena Calder was from all of it. Every surface was polished chrome, stark white marble, or immaculate glass. It was a beautiful, sterile cage, and she was its only occupant, save for the rotating staff who moved through it with the hushed reverence of ghosts. 2 years ago, a catastrophic helicopter crash had claimed her husband Robert and the use of her legs. The official diagnosis was a T4 spinal cord injury. Complete. The doctors, the best money could buy, had used words like permanent and irreversible. They had prescribed therapies to maintain muscle mass and prevent sores, not to inspire hope. Hope was a luxury her pragmatism couldn't afford. So she ruled her global tech empire, Calder Industries, from a state-of-the-art wheelchair, her mind as sharp and ruthless as ever, while her body remained a treasonous vessel. Stephen Maxwell's world began at 10 p.m., when the tower's ambition and energy had bled out, leaving behind only the ghosts of the day's deals and deadlines. He was a single father to a 7-year-old girl named Lily, a bright spark of sunshine with her father's kind eyes and a missing front tooth. Their life was a tiny 2-bedroom apartment that smelled of warm laundry and whatever simple dinner he'd managed to cook before his shift. His existence was a carefully balanced equation of rent, groceries, Lily's school supplies, and the crushing weight of knowing there was no safety net. He wasn't supposed to clean the private penthouse while the principal, as the staff called Rowena, was present. The protocol was clear: wait for the head of household, Mrs. Gable, to give the all clear. But tonight the schedules were off. A server had crashed on the 48th floor, and Stephen had been rerouted. By the time he reached the penthouse, it was nearly 2 a.m. Assuming the space was empty, he keyed in his code and pushed his cart into the cavernous living area. And there she was. Rowena Calder was silhouetted against the city lights, her wheelchair parked perilously close to the glass. She wasn't looking at the view. Her head was bowed, her shoulders shaking with silent, ragged sobs. On the floor beside her lay the shattered remains of a picture frame. Inside the broken glass was a photo of her and a handsome, smiling man. Robert. Stephen froze. His job description was simple: be invisible. A janitor was a function, not a person. To see the untouchable Rowena Calder in such a raw, unguarded moment felt like a profound violation. He began to back away, his rubber-soled shoes silent on the marble. But then she spoke, her voice a raw, broken whisper, not meant for him or anyone. "I can't even pick it up. Useless." Every instinct screamed at him to leave, to pretend he'd seen nothing. It was safer. But then he thought of Lily, and the times she'd fallen off the swings and felt so broken, and all she had needed was for someone to sit with her on the wood chips until the world stopped spinning. He cleared his throat softly. "Ma'am?" Rowena's head snapped up. Her face, usually a mask of stoic command in business journals, was slick with tears. Her eyes, the color of a stormy sea, narrowed with a flash of fury and humiliation. "Who are you? What are you doing in here?" "Stephen Maxwell, ma'am. Night custodian. There was a mix-up with the schedule. I'm sorry, I'll leave." "Get out," she commanded, her voice regaining its icy edge. She swiped at her tears with the back of her hand, a gesture of pure anger at her own weakness. Stephen nodded, but his eyes were drawn to the broken glass. "Ma'am, please don't try to move. The glass is sharp." He couldn't help himself. He walked forward, knelt, and began carefully picking up the larger shards, his calloused fingers moving with a practiced gentleness. He retrieved the photograph, its corner bent, but the image of the happy couple intact. He placed it carefully on a nearby table. Rowena watched him, her jaw tight. She had security personnel who would have handled this. She had Mrs. Gable. She had a dozen people she could summon with the press of a button. Yet this man, this janitor, was kneeling on her floor, cleaning up her mess with a quiet dignity that was more unnerving than any pity she'd ever received. "I didn't ask for your help," she said, the words sharp as the glass he was collecting. "I know," Stephen said, not looking at her. He pulled a small dustpan and brush from his cart and meticulously swept up the glittering fragments. "But sometimes the person who needs the help is the last one to ask for it." He stood up, disposing of the glass in his refuse bin. He looked at her, really looked at her, not at the billionaire or the cripple, but at the woman sitting in the dark. He saw the flicker of a muscle in her calf, a tiny involuntary spasm she likely didn't even notice. He'd seen it before, in his past life, a life before Lily, before janitorial carts. It was a ghost of a signal, a faint spark on a dead wire. Most people saw a tragedy, a woman entombed in a chair. Stephen, for a reason he couldn't yet explain to her, saw a flicker of possibility. He turned to leave, his duty as an invisible man calling to him, but he stopped at the door. "My daughter," he said, his voice quiet but clear in the vast, silent room. "She thinks I'm a superhero. She thinks I can fix anything that's broken." He paused, gathering a courage he didn't know he possessed. "I'm just a janitor," Mrs. Calder. "But I believe her." He left without another word, leaving Rowena Calder alone in her glass cage, the echo of his strange, gentle words hanging in the air long after the scent of his cleaning solution had faded. For the first time in 2 years, she felt something other than rage or despair. She felt a sliver of profound, terrifying curiosity. The following nights were different. An unspoken tension now existed between the penthouse and Stephen's cleaning cart. Mrs. Gable had been informed of the incident, and while Stephen wasn't fired, Rowena had inexplicably told her to let it go. The household manager now watched him with a hawk-like intensity, but Stephen's path and Rowena's began to cross with an almost fated regularity. He'd find her in the study at 3 a.m., a book fallen to the floor just beyond her reach. He would pick it up without a word, place it on her lap, and continue mopping. Another night, he saw her struggling with the cap on a water bottle, her fingers, weakened by disuse, refusing to grip. He approached, silently offered a hand, twisted it open with a soft pop, and retreated. He never spoke unless spoken to. He never offered pity. He simply observed and assisted, a quiet presence in her silent, sleepless nights. Rowena found herself unnerved by him. He didn't fawn. He didn't avert his eyes in awkward sympathy. He looked at her directly, his gaze steady and unassuming. He saw her, not her chair. It was infuriating. It stripped away the armor of her disability, the very thing she used to keep the world at bay. One night, a week after the broken frame, she was pushing herself through a grueling, pointless physical therapy session in her private gym. Her therapist, a highly paid professional named Dr. Evans, was guiding her through passive leg stretches. "Excellent, Rowena. Just try to visualize the muscle contracting," he said in a placating, gentle tone that made her want to scream. Visualize? She had visualized until her brain ached. She had meditated, focused, and begged her traitorous nerves to fire. Nothing. It was a hopeless, expensive pantomime. "I'm done for tonight, Robert," she clipped, her patience shredded. Evans was his name, but in her mind, every man she dealt with professionally blurred into the name of her late husband. "Of course," he said, making notes on his tablet. "We'll continue with the upper body regimen tomorrow." After he left, Rowena remained, stewing in the smell of rubber mats and sanitized equipment. She looked at her own legs, pale and the still beneath her workout pants. They were objects, foreign things attached to her body. In a fit of pure, unadulterated rage, she balled her fists and slammed them down on her thighs. She felt the dull thud through her bones, but no pain, no sensation, just a dead, mocking silence from the flesh. A soft clang from the doorway made her look up. It was Stephen holding a bucket. He had seen her. He had witnessed her moment of utter, pathetic despair. The humiliation was a physical blow. "What do you want?" she snarled. "A front row seat to the freak show?" Stephen didn't flinch. He set his bucket down and walked slowly toward her. He stopped a few feet away, his expression not one of pity, but of intense focus. "You're doing it wrong," he said quietly. Rowena stared at him, dumbfounded. "What did you just say to me?" "The therapy," he clarified, gesturing to her legs. "The way you're thinking about it. You're trying to command the muscle. You're shouting at a door that's lost its key. You need to find a different way in." A harsh, incredulous laugh erupted from her. It was a brittle, ugly sound. "You're a janitor. You push a mop. And you're going to lecture me on neuroscience? I have the best medical team on the planet. Get out of my sight." He didn't move. His gaze was fixed on her legs. "The best team money can buy, sure. They see a severed connection, a diagnosis. They see the end of a road. They're not looking for a footpath through the woods." This was too much. The audacity, the sheer nerve of this man. "And you are? The janitor is going to find the magic footpath?" she sneered, her voice dripping with sarcasm. This was the moment, the precipice. Stephen took a deep breath, the scent of bleach and determination filling his lungs. He met her mocking gaze with an unwavering sincerity that was utterly disarming. "Yes," he said, his voice low but ringing with a conviction that defied all logic. "They've given up on you. They're just maintaining the status quo. But you haven't given up, not really. I saw it the other night. I see it now. You're a fighter. You just need someone to fight with you, not for you." He took another step closer, his presence filling the sterile gym with an unexpected warmth. "Mrs. Calder," he said, his voice dropping to an intense whisper. "Let me help you. I'll help you walk again." The world seemed to stop. The hum of the tower's ventilation, the distant city traffic, all of it faded away. There was only the janitor's impossible promise hanging in the air. Rowena stared at him. She saw the earnestness in his eyes, the complete lack of guile. It was the most absurd, the most insane thing she had ever heard. All the specialists, the millions in medical bills, the grim prognoses, and here was the night cleaner, with his worn uniform and calloused hands, offering a miracle like it was a cup of coffee. She laughed. It started as a small, choked sound, then grew into a full-blown, hysterical peal of laughter. She laughed until tears streamed down her face, a torrent of disbelief, despair, and a tiny, terrifying flicker of something she hadn't felt in 2 years. It wasn't hope. It was something wilder, more dangerous. It was possibility. Stephen stood his ground, letting her laugh. He didn't look offended or embarrassed. He just waited. When her laughter finally subsided into shuddering breaths, she looked up at him, her face a mess of tears and mascara. Her voice was a raw, trembling whisper. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you say something so cruel?" "Because it's not cruel," he answered, his voice impossibly gentle. "The cruel thing is letting you believe there's no chance at all. The cruel thing is letting you sit here and hit your own legs in defeat." He paused. "I'll help you walk. Just give me a chance to show you how." And then she cried. It wasn't the laughter-fueled tears from before. These were different. They were hot, silent tears of grief for the life she'd lost, of rage at her helplessness, and, most terrifyingly, of a tiny, fragile seed of trust being planted in the barren ground of her soul by the most unlikely person in her universe. She cried, and for the first time, she didn't feel completely alone in her cage. The next day, Rowena's world was tilted on its axis. She had expected to wake up and dismiss the janitor's promise as a bizarre, late-night hallucination. Instead, his words had taken root in her mind, a persistent, thorny vine of what if. She fired Dr. Evans. The call was brief and brutal, leaving the acclaimed therapist sputtering in confusion. She then informed a stunned Mrs. Gable that Stephen Maxwell's duties were to be adjusted. "He will report to me directly every evening at 10 p.m., Rowena stated, her tone leaving no room for argument. "His cleaning duties are secondary. His primary function is a new, personal wellness initiative." Mrs. Gable looked as if Rowena had just announced she was taking up skydiving. Ma'am, with all due respect, he's a custodian. We have world-class trainers, therapists. I have had world-class everything, Helen. Rowena cut in, her voice sharp. And here I sit. This is my decision. That night, Stephen entered the penthouse gym, not with a mop, but with a simple canvas bag. He looked nervous but resolute. Rowena was waiting, her arms crossed, her expression a mixture of skepticism and desperation. "All right, Mr. Maxwell," she said, her voice betraying none of the turmoil inside her. "You've made an extraordinary claim. The stage is yours. What's your miracle cure? Magic beans? Holy water?" Stephen smiled faintly. "Nothing like that, ma'am. Just a different approach." He reached into his bag and pulled out not some advanced medical device, but a small, worn wooden box filled with sand and a handful of marbles. Rowena stared at the objects. "Is this a joke? Are we building a sandcastle?" "Close," he said. He knelt and poured the sand into a shallow tray on the floor. "The big picture goal, walking, is overwhelming. It's a mountain. We're not going to even look at the mountain. We're going to focus on finding the first stone of a new path." He looked at her feet, which were resting passively on the wheelchair's footplates. "Your doctors focused on your legs. They're wrong. The problem isn't just in your legs, it's in the signal, the connection from your brain. We need to wake up the nerves, not just stretch the muscles." He gently took her right foot in his hands. His touch was firm and professional, entirely devoid of pity. It was the touch of someone who understood anatomy. "They told you the connection was severed. I don't believe that. I think it's just dormant. The highway is blocked, but there might be tiny country roads still open. We have to coax the traffic back, one car at a time." He placed her bare foot into the tray of sand. "Now," he said, his voice low and encouraging, "don't try to move your foot. Don't try to move your leg. I want you to close your eyes and just think about the sand. Feel the texture. Is it coarse? Is it cool? Focus every bit of your attention on the sensation of the grains between your toes." It was the strangest request she'd ever heard. For 10 minutes they sat in silence, him holding her ankle steady, her concentrating on the feeling of sand on skin she couldn't truly feel. It was maddening, pointless. "I feel nothing," she said, her frustration mounting. "That's okay," he said calmly. "Yesterday you weren't trying. Today you are. That's progress." He then dropped a few marbles into the sand near her foot. "Now, I want you to visualize one of your toes, just the big toe, pushing a marble. Don't try to do it. Just see it in your mind's eye, a tiny nudge." They did this for an hour, sand, marbles, and intense, focused visualization. It felt absurd. Yet there was a strange intimacy to it. Stephen's quiet, patient guidance was a world away from the clinical detachment of her doctors. He spoke of the body not as a broken machine, but as a garden that needed to be patiently tended. Days turned into a week. Every night, Stephen would arrive with his simple tools. He used feathers to trace patterns on her shins, ice cubes to provide brief, sharp sensations, and textured cloths to rub against her soles. He was trying to bombard her dormant nerves with sensory information, hoping to find a spark. During this time, Rowena's protective older brother, Gregory Calder, began to notice the change. Gregory was the COO of Calder Industries, a pragmatic, no-nonsense man who had been his sister's rock since the accident. He came to the penthouse for their weekly strategy dinner and found her not in her study poring over market projections, but on the floor of the gym with the janitor, her foot in a tray of sand. "Cassie, what in God's name is this?" he demanded, his eyes narrowing at Stephen. "It's my new physical therapy, Gregory," she replied coolly. "With the janitor?" he said, disbelief dripping from every syllable. "Have you lost your mind? This man is a charlatan, a predator preying on your vulnerability. I'm calling security." "You will do no such thing." Rowena's voice was steel. "This is the first time in 2 years I have felt anything other than despair. Mr. Maxwell is under my employ, and you will treat him with respect." Gregory was aghast. He pulled her aside. "Cassie, listen to me. This is dangerous. Giving you false hope is the cruelest thing anyone can do." I've had our head of security, a man named Peterson, run a background check on this. Stephen Maxwell. He's a high school graduate, worked odd jobs. He has a daughter. He's drowning in debt. Don't you see? He's looking for a payday. The words stung Rowena, planting a seed of doubt. Was Gregory right? Was she just a desperate woman clinging to the fantasies of a clever con man? That night, her resolve wavered. My brother thinks you're a fraud, she said to Stephen, her tone accusatory. He says you're just after my money. Stephen finished packing his bag of marbles and sand. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. He's right about one thing. I am drowning in debt. Taking care of my daughter on my salary is difficult. And if you offered me money, I wouldn't say no. But that's not why I'm here. Then why? She pressed, needing to believe him, yet terrified of being a fool. Because I used to be a physical therapy student, he said softly, revealing a piece of his past for the first time. Top of my class. I was 6 months from my doctorate when Lily's mother left, and Lily got sick, really sick. I had to drop out. I took the first job that would give me nights so I could be with her during the day. That was 7 years ago. He met her eyes. I'm not a fraud, Mrs. Calder. I'm just a man who had to put one dream on hold to save another. But I never stopped learning. I never stopped believing in what the human body is capable of. The confession hung in the air between them, raw and real. It wasn't the slick story of a con artist. It was the quiet, heartbreaking truth of a life derailed. Now, he said, his voice regaining its gentle authority, let's get back to work. Forget the marbles. Tonight we're going to try something different. Close your eyes. I want you to remember the feeling of wiggling your toes in warm beach sand. Not here, in your memory. Feel the sun on your skin. Hear the waves. She closed her eyes, skeptical but willing. She focused, digging deep into a memory of a vacation with Robert in the Caribbean. The sun, the salt spray, the gritty warmth of the sand. She poured all her mental energy into that single, simple sensation. She imagined her big toe, just digging down, making a little furrow in the sand. And then it happened. A twitch. It was minuscule. A tiny, insignificant flicker in the abductor hallucis muscle on the side of her foot. It was a signal so faint, she thought she'd imagined it. But Stephen saw it. His eyes widened. There, he whispered, his voice electric. Did you feel that? I don't know, she stammered, her heart hammering against her ribs. Do it again, he urged, his voice filled with an intensity that matched her own. She closed her eyes, her entire being focused on that one spot. She pictured the beach, the sun, the sand. Wiggle. It happened again. A distinct, undeniable, glorious twitch. A muscle, her muscle, had responded to a command from her brain for the first time in 24 months. She gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes, hot and immediate. She looked from her trembling toe to Stephen's face, which was beaming with a smile so pure and triumphant, it lit up the entire room. She hadn't taken a step. She hadn't stood up. But in that moment, she had moved a mountain. The path through the woods was real. And the janitor, the single father with his bag of sand and marbles, was the only one who had known how to find it. The twitch was a seismic event. It shattered the foundation of Rowena's disbelief and replaced it with a fragile, terrifying edifice of hope. The nightly sessions with Stephen intensified, evolving from sensory bombardment to a focused, disciplined regimen. Stephen introduced a technique he called neuro-remapping, a term he'd coined himself based on theories he'd studied. The goal was to persuade her brain to find new neural pathways to bypass the damaged area of her spine. He brought in a set of EMG biofeedback sensors he'd bought with his own meager savings. They attached the small pads to her legs, which linked to a simple monitor. The machine would beep if it detected even the faintest electrical signal in a muscle. For hours, Rowena would stare at the silent monitor, her mind locked in a silent battle with her body, trying to make the machine sing. The first time she made it beep consistently by twitching her toe, they celebrated with takeout pizza, eaten on the floor of the gym. It was a surreal scene. The billionaire in her $1,000 silk pajamas and the janitor in his work-worn khakis, sharing a pepperoni pizza on a yoga mat. For the first time, she asked him about Lily. His face transformed when he spoke of her, lighting up with a love so profound it was almost tangible. He showed Rowena a picture on his cracked phone, a smiling, gap-toothed girl on a swing. In that moment, he wasn't her employee. He was a father, proud and devoted. And she wasn't a patient. She was just a woman, listening. Progress was slow and arduous, measured in microvolts and millimeters. A twitch in her toe became a controlled flutter. A flutter in her calf became a weak but deliberate contraction. Gregory remained deeply skeptical, viewing the whole affair as a dangerous fantasy. He saw his sister, once the most formidable mind in the tech world, placing her faith in a high school dropout with a sad story and some cheap electronics. He instructed Peterson, his head of security, to keep a close, discreet watch on Stephen Maxwell. 3 months into their new routine, they reached a milestone. Stephen had designed a harness system suspended from the ceiling over a set of parallel bars. It was designed to support her full body weight, allowing her to be in an upright position without the risk of falling. "Today you're going to stand," Stephen announced, his voice steady, though Rowena could see the nervous energy in his eyes. Her heart pounded. Standing. It was something she hadn't done since she'd stepped onto that helicopter 2 years ago. The nurses and therapists had used machines to stand her up, strapping her to a tilt table to prevent blood pressure drops. But this was different. This was an attempt to stand under her own power. Stephen and a trusted female nurse, whom Rowena had hired on Stephen's recommendation, carefully transferred her from the chair to the harness. With her feet positioned flat on the floor, Stephen stood in front of her, his hands on the parallel bars. "All right, Rowena," he said, using her first name for the first time. It felt natural, right? "All the work we've been doing, all those beeps on the monitor, it all leads to this. Your brain knows the way. You just have to trust it. Lock your knees, fire your quads. I've got you." She looked down at her feet, which seemed a mile away. She could feel the harness taking her weight, but the act of standing required her own muscles to engage, to stabilize. She took a shaky breath, closed her eyes, and issued the command, "Stand." For a moment, nothing. Then she felt it, a deep, trembling shudder starting in her thighs and traveling up through her core. Her legs, which had been limp appendages for so long, began to stiffen, to lock. The trembling was violent, a testament to the monumental effort required, but they were holding. Slowly, shakily, supported by the harness but powered by her own reawakened nerves, she was standing. Tears streamed down her face as a strangled sob escaped her lips. She wasn't just upright, she was a column of strength. She opened her eyes and saw her own reflection in the gym's mirrored wall. A woman standing, and in front of her, Stephen, his face a mask of awe, pride, and relief. "I'm standing," she whispered, the words tasting like victory. "You're standing," he confirmed, his voice thick with emotion. It was in this moment of pure triumph that a shadow from her past decided to reemerge. The news of her miraculous progress, however contained within the penthouse walls, had begun to leak. A nurse, a household staff member, it was impossible to know who, had whispered to someone, who whispered to someone else. And the whispers reached Finney and Kane. Kane was a ruthless corporate raider, a rival Rowena and Robert had bested in a hostile takeover bid years ago. The defeat had nearly bankrupted him and cost him his reputation. He was a man who held grudges like they were stock certificates. Since her accident, he had been circling Calder Industries like a vulture, probing for weaknesses, waiting for an opportunity to strike. Her incapacitation was his opening. He saw this news not as a miracle, but as a threat. A recovering Rowena was a powerful Rowena. A walking Rowena was an invincible one. He couldn't allow that. One afternoon, Gregory stormed into the penthouse, his face pale with fury. He was holding a tablet, displaying a salacious article from a notorious gossip blog. The headline screamed, "Crippled billionaire duped, fake healer, or fortune-hunting lover." Inside Rowena Calder's bizarre relationship with her janitor. The article was vicious. It painted Stephen as a manipulative con artist, using pseudo-scientific babble to seduce a vulnerable, grieving widow. It included details of their late-night sessions, twisted into something sordid and transactional. It even featured a grainy, long-lens photograph of Stephen helping Rowena into the harness, a moment of triumph now framed as an act of exploitation. Worst of all, it quoted an anonymous source from her medical team, likely the disgruntled Dr. Evans, dismissing her progress as hysterical conversion and placebo-induced muscle spasms. The article was a character assassination, designed to humiliate her and discredit her recovery. It was a classic Kane move. Attack not the business, but the person leading it. Rowena felt the blood drain from her face. The fragile hope she had so carefully nurtured felt as if it had been doused in gasoline and set ablaze. The world, which had started to feel full of promise, once again seemed hostile and cruel. "This is what I warned you about, Cassie," Gregory raged. "You brought this upon yourself. The board is in an uproar. Our stock is going to tank. He has made you a laughingstock." The accusation hit her harder than the article itself. She looked at the picture, at her face contorted in effort, in Stephen's expression of gentle concentration, and saw how easily their sacred work could be twisted into something ugly. The door to the gym opened and Stephen walked in, holding a new set of resistance bands. He took one look at their faces, at the tablet in Gregory's hand, and he knew. His own face went ashen. "Mr. Maxwell," Gregory spat, his voice laced with venom, "your little game is over. Get your things. Peterson will escort you from the building. If you ever come near my sister again, I will personally see to it that you are buried in so much litigation you'll never see your daughter again." Rowena didn't say a word. She couldn't. The weight of the public humiliation, her brother's anger, and her own resurrected doubts pressed down on her, silencing her. She watched, her heart fracturing, as Stephen stood there, stripped of his dignity, the hope draining from his eyes. He looked at her, searching for her to say something, to defend him, to defend them. But she said nothing. She just stared at the hateful headline, and in her silence, Stephen found his answer. He turned without a word and walked out of her life. The door clicked shut behind him, the sound as final as a tomb ceiling. The silence Stephen left behind was heavier and more oppressive than any Rowena had ever known. The penthouse, once a space of burgeoning hope, reverted to being her gilded prison. Gregory, believing he had saved his sister from a predator, immediately hired a new, elite team of physical therapists from Switzerland. They arrived with gleaming equipment, impressive credentials, and a rigid clinical methodology. They strapped her into exoskeletons, hooked her up to machines that moved her legs for her, and spoke in optimistic but hollow tones about maintaining neuromuscular plasticity. They were everything her old therapists had been, only more expensive. There was no sand, no marbles, no quiet encouragement. There was no talk of footpaths through the woods. They saw her as a problem to be managed, not a person to be healed, and her body knew the difference. The progress she had made with Stephen vanished as if it had been a dream. The tiny electrical signals on the biofeedback monitor faded back into silence. The strength she had felt in her legs dissolved. When they put her in the harness, her legs buckled, refusing to lock. The trembling effort was gone, replaced by a limp, dead weight. Despair, cold and familiar, settled back over her. She had been a fool. The gossip blog, her brother, all of them had been right. It must have been a fluke, a psychological trick. Stephen Maxwell had been selling her snake oil, and she, in her desperation, had bought it all. The shame was a constant, bitter taste in her mouth. Meanwhile, Stephen's life had imploded. Fired, publicly shamed, and threatened with legal action, he was radioactive. The story had been picked up by mainstream news outlets, and his face was everywhere. He was the janitor Svengali. He couldn't find another job. The whispers and stares followed him everywhere. He and Lily had to live off his meager savings, which were dwindling at an alarming rate. But it wasn't the loss of income that crushed him. It was the loss of purpose. It was Rowena's silence. She hadn't defended him. She had let her brother throw him to the wolves. The betrayal hurt more than any headline. Yet even through his anger and hurt, he couldn't shake a nagging feeling that something was wrong. The sudden and complete reversal of her progress didn't make sense. Even with a psychological setback, the neural pathways they had started to build shouldn't have just disappeared overnight. Gregory, for his part, was not celebrating. He had expected Rowena to be relieved, to thank him for saving her. Instead, she had retreated into a stony, resentful silence, refusing to engage with her new therapist or her work. Their stock, as he had feared, had taken a significant hit after the scandal, and now with whispers of the CEO's relapse, their biggest rival was capitalizing on the instability. Finian Kane was buying up Calder stock through shell corporations, positioning himself for a hostile takeover. Gregory was fighting a war on two fronts, one for his company and one for his sister's soul. His security chief, Peterson, a meticulous and observant man, came to him one day with a disturbing report. "Mr. Calder, something isn't adding up about that media leak." "What are you talking about, Peterson?" "It was Maxwell's greed, plain and simple. He probably leaked it himself to set up a lawsuit." "I don't think so, sir," Peterson said, laying a folder on Gregory's desk. The blog that first ran the story, Gossip Wire, received its tip from a burner email, but the financial transaction for the story was traced. It wasn't a big payday, just enough to get them to run it. The payment originated from an offshore account, an account I've seen before. It's a known slush fund for a subsidiary of Kane Industries. Gregory felt a cold knot form in his stomach. Kane. And the photographer, Peterson continued, was paid from the same account. This wasn't a random gossip hit, sir. This was a targeted professional attack. They weren't just trying to shame you. They were trying to destabilize you. He paused. And there's more. I kept a tail on Maxwell as you instructed. He's not living large. He's barely scraping by. He hasn't contacted any lawyers. All he does is take his daughter to the park and look for work. This doesn't feel like the behavior of a man who just played a billionaire. The information shook Gregory's certainty. If Kane was behind the media smear, what was his endgame? And if Stephen wasn't a con man, then what was he? The answer came from the most unexpected source. One of the new Swiss therapists, a young, ambitious man named Dr. Alleman, requested a private meeting with Gregory. He was visibly nervous. "Mr. Calder," he began, wringing his hands, "I cannot in good conscience continue my work here. There is an anomaly in Mrs. Calder's medical regimen." "What are you talking about?" Gregory demanded. "Her nightly medication. It includes a standard muscle relaxant, tizanidine, to control spasticity. This is normal. But the dosage she is being administered, it is triple the recommended maximum. At that level, it wouldn't just relax her muscles. It would cause significant sedation and flaccidity. It would make voluntary muscle contraction nearly impossible." Gregory stared at him, the pieces clicking into place with sickening horror. The regression, the limpness, the inability to stand. It wasn't psychological, it was chemical. She was being drugged. "Who administers this medication?" Gregory asked, his voice dangerously low. "Her primary evening nurse, a woman named Sophia. She was hired about 4 months ago." 4 months ago? Right when her progress with Stephen had truly begun to accelerate. It was a conspiracy, but the target hadn't been the company's stock price. Not directly. The target was Rowena's recovery. Someone was intentionally keeping her weak, keeping her in that chair. Someone wanted the world to believe that her recovery was a fluke, and that she was a broken, unstable leader. Someone like Finian Kane. The realization hit Gregory like a physical blow. He had been so focused on protecting his sister from the wrong threat that he had personally opened the door to the real one. He had thrown out the one person who was actually helping her, and in his place, allowed a saboteur to get close. He had been Kane's unwitting pawn. His first instinct was to call the police, to have the nurse arrested. But he knew Kane would have insulated himself. The nurse would be the only one to fall, and the truth of the conspiracy would be buried. He needed proof. And more than that, he needed help. He needed someone who understood Rowena's unique therapy, someone who could assess the damage and, if possible, reverse it. Swallowing his pride, a bitter and unfamiliar taste, Gregory Calder picked up his phone. He didn't call the police. He didn't call his lawyers. He looked up the address for a man he had humiliated and threatened, a man living in a rundown apartment on the other side of town. He had to get Stephen Maxwell back. Stephen was making Lily a grilled cheese sandwich, cutting it into diagonal halves the way she liked, when the knock came. He expected a landlord chasing late rent or a neighbor complaining about noise. He did not expect to open his door and find the imperious Gregory Calder standing on his worn welcome mat, looking profoundly uncomfortable. "Maxwell," Gregory said, his voice stiff, "I need to speak with you." Stephen's first instinct was to slam the door in his face. "I think you've said everything you need to say to me, Mr. Calder. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm in the middle of a very important lunch meeting." He started to close the door. "Wait," Gregory said, putting a hand out to stop it. The gesture wasn't aggressive, it was desperate. "Please, it's about Rowena. I was wrong about everything." The sincerity in his voice, the complete absence of his usual arrogance, made Stephen pause. He looked past Gregory and saw a black town car idling at the curb, a clear sign that this wasn't a casual visit. "Daddy, who is it?" Lily called from the small kitchen table. "Just a man from my old job, sweetie," Stephen called back, his eyes never leaving Gregory's. He stepped outside, pulling the door closed behind him. "You have 5 minutes." Standing on the cracked pavement of his apartment complex under the harsh afternoon sun, Gregory laid it all out. The media smear traced back to Kane, the sudden reversal of Rowena's progress, and the horrifying discovery of the sabotaged medication. He spoke quickly, clinically, but his anguish was palpable. "The nurse, Sophia, has been drugging her for months," Gregory finished, the words tasting like poison. "I accused you. I threatened you. And all the while, I was letting the real monster into my sister's home. I let her get hurt." Stephen listened, his own anger slowly being replaced by a cold dread. It all made sense now. The completeness of her regression wasn't just a setback, it was an attack. Rowena wasn't weak, she was being weakened. "What do you want from me?" Stephen asked, his voice flat. "I want you to come back," Gregory said, the plea undisguised. "The new therapists are useless. They don't understand what you were doing. I need you to fix what I broke. I'll pay you whatever you want. I'll issue a public retraction, an apology. I'll restore your name." Stephen thought of Lily, of the eviction notice he'd received that morning. The money would change their lives. But it wasn't about the money. It was about Rowena, alone in that penthouse, being systematically poisoned while believing he had abandoned her, that their work had been a lie. "I don't care about my name," Stephen said, his jaw tight. "And I don't want your money as a bribe. I'll come back on one condition. Anything. You and I work together. We don't just fire this nurse. We expose her. We expose Kane. We give Rowena her power back, not just in her legs, but in her life. And you will never, ever stand between me and helping your sister again." A look of profound relief washed over Gregory's face. He extended a hand. "You have my word." Stephen looked at the offered hand, the hand of a man who had nearly destroyed him, and after a long moment, he shook it. A fragile, unlikely alliance was formed. Their plan was meticulous. They couldn't let the nurse know she was discovered. Gregory arranged for the security system to have a glitch, allowing Stephen to enter the penthouse undetected that night. The goal was twofold: for Stephen to observe Rowena without the nurse's interference, and to secure a sample of the medication for independent testing. That night, Stephen slipped back into the silent, opulent world of Calder Tower. He moved through the service corridors he knew so well, his heart pounding with a mixture of anxiety and grim determination. He found Rowena in her bedroom. She was asleep, but it was a heavy, unnatural slumber. The vibrant, combative woman he knew was gone, replaced by a pale, listless figure. Her dinner tray was on the bedside table, a small paper cup with a single pill remaining beside her water glass. He watched from the shadows as the night nurse, Sophia, came in to check on her. She was a pleasant-looking woman in her 40s, her movements efficient and seemingly caring. She straightened Rowena's blankets, checked her vitals, and then, thinking she was unobserved, she took the final pill from the cup, crushed it, and mixed it into the fresh glass of water she'd brought for the night. It was a clear deviation from standard protocol. Pills were to be administered whole, with the patient's knowledge. This was a covert, malicious act. After Sophia left, Stephen crept into the room. His hands trembled as he used a sterile syringe he'd brought to draw a sample from the water glass. He then looked down at Rowena's sleeping form. He wanted to wake her, to tell her the truth, but it wasn't time. He had to be patient. He gently brushed a stray strand of hair from her forehead, his touch feather light. "I'm back, Rowena," he whispered, "and I'm not leaving again." The next day, the lab results confirmed their fears. The sample contained not just the prescribed tizanidine, but a massive dose of it, combined with a mild, unprescribed sedative designed to ensure she slept through the night and remained groggy the next day. It was a chemical straitjacket. Now they had their proof. That evening, Gregory and Stephen, along with Peterson, confronted the nurse as she arrived for her shift. Sophia initially blustered, but when presented with the lab report in Peterson's quiet but menacing presence, she crumbled. Sobbing, she confessed everything. Finney and Kane had found her through a third party. She had a gambling debt she couldn't pay. They had threatened her family. She admitted to swapping the prescribed dosage with the higher one provided to her weekly by a courier. They recorded her entire confession. It was the weapon they needed. With the nurse removed and her medication corrected, the change in Rowena was immediate and dramatic. Within 48 hours, the fog began to lift from her mind. The heavy lethargy was replaced by a familiar, sharp-edged awareness. And with that awareness came a flood of questions. Gregory sat with her and told her everything, from his initial suspicions about Stephen to the discovery of Kane's plot and Sophia's betrayal. He confessed his own role, his pride and fear that had made him an unwitting accomplice. He didn't spare himself. Rowena listened in stunned silence, her expression shifting from confusion to shock to incandescent fury. She had been violated in the most intimate way, her own body used as a weapon against her. The people she trusted had betrayed her, and the one person she had pushed away had been the only one telling the truth. "Where is he?" she asked, her voice quiet but dangerously steady. "Where is Stephen?" "He's here," Gregory said. "He's been waiting." Gregory opened the study door, and Stephen walked in. He looked tired but resolute. Their eyes met across the vast room. The air was thick with unspoken words, with hurt, betrayal, and a deep, aching need for reconciliation. She didn't apologize. He didn't ask for one. Her eyes, clear and sharp for the first time in weeks, said everything. They were filled with regret, with gratitude, and with a steely resolve that matched his own. The real work could now begin. The alliance between Rowena, Stephen, and Gregory was now forged in steel. Their first move was swift and decisive. Armed with the nurse's recorded confession and Peterson's evidence trail, their legal team cornered Finney and Kane. Presented with proof of criminal conspiracy, Kane was given a simple choice: face federal prison or relinquish his company. He chose to disappear. Calder Industries absorbed its primary rival, a stunning corporate victory orchestrated not in a boardroom, but from Rowena's private gym. With the threat neutralized, the true work began. Free from the chemical sabotage, Rowena's body responded with an eagerness that amazed them all. The nightly sessions resumed, no longer marked by a professional distance, but by a deep, unspoken partnership. Stephen pushed her relentlessly, his quiet encouragement fueling her iron will. The penthouse itself transformed. The sterile silence was broken by the sound of Lily's laughter during weekend visits, her bright spirit chasing away the last shadows of despair. Watching Stephen with his daughter, Rowena saw the future he was fighting for, and for the first time began to see a place for herself within it. 6 months after Stephen's return, the pivotal moment arrived. Rowena was standing between the parallel bars, her legs trembling but strong, the harness of familiar comfort. "Let go of the bars, Rowena," Stephen said softly from a few feet away. Fear warred with a fierce desire in her eyes. "I can't." "You can," he answered, his voice filled with the same unwavering faith he'd had from the beginning. "Trust yourself. I'm right here." She took a shaky breath, then released her right hand, then her left. For a heart-stopping 10 seconds, she stood entirely on her own, a column of trembling, triumphant strength. A breathless laugh escaped her lips. "Now come here," Stephen urged gently. Looking only at him, she lifted her right foot. It was a heavy, clumsy motion, but it was a step, then the left. It was a lurching, awkward shuffle, but it was walking. 1 step, 2, 3. On the 4th, her legs finally gave out, but Stephen closed the distance in an instant, catching her securely in his arms. She was flush against his chest, her arms clinging to his neck as she buried her face in his shoulder. She could feel the steady beat of his heart as she wept, not with sadness, but with the overwhelming joy of rebirth. He held her, supporting her weight. "I told you I'd help you walk," he said, his voice thick with emotion. She pulled back to look at him, her tear-streaked face inches from his. The last vestiges of their old roles, billionaire and janitor, had vanished. "You did more than that, Stephen," she whispered. "You taught me how to live again." Then she closed the small distance between them and kissed him, a kiss not of gratitude, but of profound, unwavering partnership. Their world was no longer two separate spheres, but one. Stephen enrolled online to finish his doctorate, his education a priority they now shared. Rowena returned to the helm of her empire, but she led with a new perspective, speaking of resilience and human connection. She walked not with a perfect stride, but with a stylish cane she wielded like a scepter, a constant reminder of her journey. He was no longer her janitor, he was her partner. Together with Lily between them, they had built a new life, proving that the strongest foundations aren't made of steel and glass, but of kindness, courage, and love. Ultimately, this story is about more than a woman learning to walk. It's about two lonely souls from different worlds healing each other. Stephen and Rowena's journey proves that true strength isn't measured by wealth or status. It's found in the courage to see the humanity in a person, to make an impossible promise, and to believe in the quiet miracles born from simple, persistent kindness. If this story of hope and connection resonated with you, please like this video and share it with someone who needs it. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications for more stories that celebrate the incredible strength of the human heart.